It was late, after 11 o'clock, and I was in the storage area of our building, rearranging some boxes. I was a nighttime stalker at a regular hardware store. Since my other regular coworker was away on vacation, I was on my own last night. Even if nothing got done, I didn't mind because when you're on your own, fewer people have high expectations of you. I was taking my time and working slowly. All day long, we had packages coming in, and they had to be sorted and placed by the aisles. So, I simply dismantled pallets, loaded boxes onto carts, and rolled them into the main store area to be stocked. After loading a few carts, I pushed one to the far left aisle. It was raining heavily, and perhaps even storming, outside. But I thought I heard something from the front of the building, even though it was raining. It never occurred to me that the noises could have been caused by anything other than the building itself. I grabbed a few cartons and began stocking, singing to myself to stave off the monotony. On the other hand, I thought I heard something again. I went to the store's entrance and scanned the area beyond the entrance door. It appeared that no one or anything was present. I was in no hurry to get to work, so I lingered for a while longer. After that, it happened once more. This time, I was sure I saw motion by the front door, which is where the noises were coming from. Even though I was safe inside my office with the doors locked, I decided to peek outside to make sure nothing unusual was happening. When I went to the front door to look outside, I saw that the glass was covered in smudges and scratches. There were no people or vehicles to be seen, only relentless rain. I made my way back to my desk and turned to leave. After what seemed like an hour of peace, the sound resumed at the front door. I stopped what I was doing and went to the front of the store, where I could unmistakably see a person skulking around the entrance. I took a few steps forward when the figure stopped, froze for a second, and bolted away. It was too dark and rainy when I got to the door, but I was determined to catch a glimpse of whoever it was. However, closer inspection of the door revealed significantly more scuffs and scratches than before. I was sure he or she was attempting a break-in, standing by the entrance. I reached for my phone and placed a 911 call. The operator assured me that I would only have to wait a short time. I stuffed my phone back into my pocket and paced restlessly by the entrance while I waited. Even though the parking lot was still deserted, I happened to turn my head and see that same figure standing against the building. Fearing he had seen me, I quickly retreated. I recoiled a few paces and made an effort to remain silent. The unknown person materialized just outside the door mere 10 seconds later. I could tell he was looking at me through the rain-splattered, foggy glass. He slammed what might have been a large rock against the window and struck it repeatedly to shatter it. I retreated more rapidly and bolted for the office in the store's rear. I was halfway across the building when I heard the door alarm go off and the glass shatter. I waited anxiously, but got no further information. There was a prolonged period of silence, during which my anxiety levels skyrocketed before the police arrived. Before they came to the office where I introduced myself and revealed what I had learned, I heard them calling out and walking around, searching the place. No one has seen the man since he smashed the window, so he must have just left. It seems extremely strange and illogical. A piece of me almost wishes he had stolen something, just so I'd have some idea of what he was after. What scares me is that he broke down the door, but then did nothing else. I have no idea what he wanted. In the past, I worked as a bus driver for elementary schools in a nearby suburb. Nearing retirement age after nearly 15 years, I began working as a bus driver in my local city. I enjoyed my job as a school bus driver, but it became more challenging as I aged to maintain a cheerful demeanor when dealing with rowdy, unpredictable kids. The city bus stop was a quick 10-minute stroll from my apartment, and most riders simply got on and off as they pleased. The driving itself was more stressful than I had anticipated, but overall, the job was less demanding. Anyway, at the city bus company where I worked, buses ran around the clock. However, at night, fewer buses were operating, and those that did run tended to take longer routes. Even though only a minority of drivers volunteered for night shifts, We day drivers were routinely subjected to working 2-night shifts every other week. It wasn't that bad, except that it threw off my sleeping schedule. Since there were fewer customers and the roads were less congested, working at night was a lot less hectic than during the day. No one was stirring between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. Over an hour, I made multiple trips along my usual route, and not a single person asked for a lift. Only a handful of people were out and about when I was there, not to pick anyone up, but to take a short break when it wasn't busy. I pulled up to the route's final stop and parked. I closed my eyes and rested my head on the seat back, trying not to nod off. A moment later, there was a startling knock at the door, and I jerked awake. At the entrance, an elderly man was just standing there, staring at me. I smiled awkwardly and nervously and opened the door. He boarded, scanned his pass at the reader, and found a seat near the rear of the bus. I jerked my head around and shouted, "No one else is out, so I can drop you off wherever you need." It was a very uncomfortable few seconds before I could turn around and continue walking. I figured he must have earbuds in, so I decided to do it the hard way and get off at every bus stop along the route. Throughout the trip, I kept looking in the rearview mirror to check on the man who seemed to be doing nothing but sitting there and staring straight ahead. It was strange behavior, but at 3 a.m., who knows what anyone is thinking. I had stopped at every one of the stops along the route and was getting close to the last two when I realized that this man hadn't gotten off yet. The route then simply circles back to where I picked him up after these points. I put the bus in the park at the next stop and looked at the man in the rearview mirror. He sat for a moment, then stood up. He started walking down the aisle, but it was strange the way he was staring at the ground. As he approached, I swung around to look at him. It brimmed over with bitterness and rage. I tried to keep up appearances by turning my head back to the road, but the guy had pulled over next to me. When I looked up, he was looking directly at me. "Is there something wrong?" I inquired further, but he just kept staring at me. He averted his gaze, returned down the aisle, and resumed his seat. At this point, I realized something was wrong, and my worries intensified. Once again in drive, I began my journey to the bus's final destination. I stopped the car when we got there and waited. The tension in the room was difficult to put into words. In front of me, the streets and sidewalks were deserted. The man then stood up and hurried down the center aisle. This time, however, he pushed me up against the side window and held a gun to my head as he approached. He stared at him with the same mad rage and fury in his eyes. There was a good chance he was going to pull the trigger, and I had no idea why or what he wanted from me. Without saying a word, the man tightened his grip on the gun and pressed harder against my skull as he continued to stare me down. Then, his mouth gaping, he let out a piercingly loud, angry scream in my direction. After that, he released his grip, took a few steps back, and left. In a hurry, I locked the door and left. Since I knew his identity could be traced back to his bus pass, I contacted the authorities right away. A police officer was dispatched to the location where I left the man, and another came to speak with me. A few days later, I was shown a photo of the man whose picture was on the bus pass the stranger had used, but he looked nothing like the photo. I have no idea what was going through that man's sick head, but it was the most bizarre, disturbing, and creepy experience I have ever had and likely will ever have. Between the ages of 25 and 30, I was employed as a librarian. I was hired to stalk and reorganize the place during overnight shifts. Even though I was told I would be working mid-shifts when I applied, a new overnight position opened up a few months later. An enormous historic stone structure in the heart of town had been renovated into the library. However, because of the company's size, it became impossible for us to stalk and reorganize the books daily. No one volunteered for the night shift because there was only one open position, and the person working it would be on their own. Even though I didn't want to, I took the overnight shifts because they paid $2 more per hour. For me at the time, that was a huge opportunity. After a few months, things had settled down nicely. Even though I was working the same hours as when I worked mid-shifts, the work was very different. I didn't have to deal with the public or waste time assisting customers. Nobody bothered me while I worked and listened to music. But strangely, as the months progressed, I became less at ease in my professional environment. It was strange because I expected to grow accustomed to the place with time, but instead, I found myself worrying about the building's antiquity. I would occasionally look up from my book collection and be confronted by the empty, shadowy room with its seemingly endless rows of shelves. I'd put on my headphones and listen, but there was always complete silence, which made me feel even more uneasy. However, one night, as I was listening to music and stalking as usual, I suddenly heard a noise on the other side of the spacious room. I came to a halt as the realization dawned that I had heard something. Then I removed my headphones and looked overhead. For a few minutes I froze in place, too afraid to take any action. Nothing else happened while I was waiting, so I went back to what I was doing. This time, however, I neglected to bring my headphones. After I was done rearranging the shelves, I rolled my cart to the back to collect the returned books, but then I heard it again, now that I wasn't listening to it through my headphones. I knew for sure that it came from inside the building, and that it was the sound of something hitting the floor. A small book might have sounded like it hit the floor, but in the vast, silent room, the sound reverberated loudly. Once again, I stopped what I was doing and stared in the direction the noise had come from. The building was packed with books, so it wasn't surprising that a few books had fallen, but that didn't put me at ease. There was an uneasy sensation like I was being watched. I was trying very hard not to panic when my mind started doing that thing again, running through every possible reason to be afraid of the place. The odds were in favor of it being nothing more than a book falling off the shelf, but I was aware of my tendency to get startled by imaginary threats to myself and forced myself to go investigate. My eyes wandered slowly down each row of shelves as I made my way slowly through the library. I searched every last aisle, but I couldn't find a single book or other item. My mind began to bring back the panic. When I gave a complete about-face, my breath stopped. Someone was waiting by the back room's entrance. They seemed to be hiding against the wall in the far corner, but I could tell they were keeping an eye on me. I fought off the overwhelming desire to scream and flee. I turned away, retraced my steps through the aisles, opened the main door, and left. The moment the door shut behind me, I ran around the building's rear to my car, where I locked myself in and then dialed 911. Weeping and trembling, that was me. I waited outside the building when they arrived, and two of them went inside to look around. Eventually, they emerged without the third. They were unable to locate anyone. After leaving the house, the first thing that crossed my mind was that I should have locked the front door. In the days that followed, my manager had us conduct a thorough inventory count, but the results indicated no major discrepancies or missing stock. This led people to wonder who the person was and why they were in the building. It's unfortunate because many of my coworkers assumed I was making up an excuse to avoid working nights. What I heard, however, is not a lie. There was no misunderstanding, and I can confirm what you saw. I was able to keep my job despite that terrible night. For a month, they were accommodating enough to let me work mid-shifts before reassigning me to nights. Nothing else of note occurred after that. What that man was hoping to accomplish remains a mystery to me.